The pain started quietly, a tightness in my chest that came and went like a wave. I thought it was just age, maybe the weather, maybe stress. But at 76, you learn to tell when something isn't just anything. And now, I know. This pain isn't passing, it's arriving. I've seen enough friends fade to recognize the feeling, the body warning you, gently at first, that time is slipping through. And today, I need to say some things before I can't anymore. Please listen closely. My name is Evelyn. I'm 76 years old, and I've carried many kinds of pain in this chest. Heartbreak, grief, joy, too heavy to hold. But this pain, this one feels different. It's not just emotional, it's physical, persistent, and quiet in the worst way. It crept in like a memory you didn't want to revisit. And now it stays. I've seen too much, lost too much to ignore it. So, I'm not here to complain. I'm here to confess. Before the silence gets louder than my voice. I want to leave behind more than clothes and pictures. I want to leave the truth. My truth. About love, regret, mistakes, and the things I wish someone had told me when I was your age. So, if you're listening, please, stay a little longer. I don't know how many more days I have to say this out loud. It was a Sunday morning, quiet and slow, the kind I used to treasure. The kettle was humming softly, and the scent of lavender soap still clung to my hands from washing the dishes. I was halfway through folding the towels when it hit me. Not sharp, not dramatic, but a slow, deliberate tightening in my chest, like someone placing a hand there, pressing gently but firmly, reminding me of something I had forgotten. At first, I paused, held my breath, waited for it to pass. It didn't. It stayed, not loud, but present. I sat down quietly, so no one would worry, not even me. I whispered to myself, "It's just the cold air," or maybe I moved wrong. But deep down, I knew. There's a kind of wisdom that arrives with age, a sense you can't explain, only feel. And that morning, I felt it. I felt something shift inside me. Not just in my body, but in my understanding of time. That pain, that silent warning, pulled back a curtain I'd kept closed for too long. Memories rushed in, uninvited but familiar. I thought of George, my husband, and the night he clutched his chest before the ambulance came. I thought of my mother's last breath, how she whispered she was tired before the light in her eyes dimmed. And I thought of all the little aches I had brushed off over the years. The messages my body had sent, quietly and kindly, until now, when the message came like a sealed envelope marked urgent. Still, I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to cause a stir. I made my tea, sat by the window, and let the warmth of the cup soothe me. But every sip came with a thought I couldn't shake. What if this is it? What if the countdown had already started, and I had just been too busy pretending I was fine? And then something odd happened. I started to remember the smallest things, the way my grandson's hands feel when he hugs me, the sound of my daughter's laughter on the phone, the crooked smile George used to give me when he was teasing. All these tiny, beautiful, almost invisible moments began to surface. It was like my body was telling me, if this is the beginning of the end, don't forget the beginning of everything. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat with it, the pain, the realization, the sudden clarity. That was the day I stopped pretending. That was the day I started listening. Not to the fear, but to the truth my body had been trying to tell me. And now, as I sit here and share this with you, I need you to hear something. Pain is never just pain. It's a message. Sometimes it's loud, but more often it's soft and patient, waiting for you to pay attention. Don't wait until it grows into something you can't ignore. Don't wait until it's too late like I almost did. Because the truth is, The pain in my chest didn't just begin a new chapter. It began the last one. I wish I could tell you that I went to the doctor that same day, that I picked up the phone, called my daughter, and told her everything. That I acted with the same urgency I would have demanded if it were her feeling this kind of pain. But the truth is, I didn't. I sat with it. I reasoned with it. I excused it. I told myself it would pass, because sometimes pretending you're fine feels safer than admitting you're not. It's a strange thing, the way we delay caring for ourselves, especially when we get older. We brush it off, say things like, "Oh, it's just age," or "I don't want to bother anyone." We've spent so many years taking care of others that when it's our turn, we don't know how to ask. Or worse, we don't feel like we're allowed to. We fear being a burden more than we fear the truth. That week, I carried the pain with me like a secret. I still cooked breakfast. I still smiled at the neighbors. I even went to church, sat through the hymns, nodded politely during the sermon. But all the while, there was this tightness, not just in my chest, but in my heart. A quiet knowing that something wasn't right, and I was choosing silence over survival. I think part of me was afraid of what I'd find out. That if I acknowledged it, it would become real. As if ignoring the warning signs would somehow keep them from growing louder. It's foolish, I know. But fear has a way of disguising itself as strength. And I wore that mask well. One night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked into my own eyes, really looked, and saw the exhaustion. Not just from the pain, but from pretending. My skin looked a little grayer, my breathing was a little shorter, and still, I told myself I was fine. And yet, in those quiet moments, I started to notice how much of myself I had stopped listening to. How many warnings I had missed, simply because I didn't want to face them. My body had been speaking to me for years in whispers, a skipped heartbeat here, a wave of dizziness there. But I had dismissed them like background noise. It took the pain in my chest to finally break through. We like to think we'll be brave when the time comes, that we'll know what to do. But courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it starts as a small decision. To take the pain seriously, to make the appointment, to tell someone the truth. I didn't do that right away, and now looking back, I understand the cost of my delay, so if you're listening, truly listening, I hope you hear this clearly. Don't wait for the pain to become unbearable. Don't wait for silence to be your only answer. Your body is speaking. Please, don't be like me. Don't wait to listen. I finally went to the doctor 11 days after that first sharp pain. 11 days of whispers growing into warnings. 11 days of brushing my fingertips against my chest, pretending not to feel the slow throb beneath my ribs. I remember sitting in the waiting room, staring at a faded painting of sunflowers on the wall, trying to distract myself with something bright, something alive. But even the colors felt distant that day. When they called my name, I stood up slowly, not from weakness, but from fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of having my quiet suffering spoken out loud, in clinical terms, with tests and numbers and timelines. A part of me was still hoping the doctor would say it was nothing. That I had just pulled a muscle, that my heart was fine, that I had worried for no reason. I was desperate for denial, but I wore it quietly. The exam room was cold, sterile. The paper on the table crinkled beneath me as I sat down, trying not to let my breathing give me away. When the doctor came in, I gave him the polite smile I give to most people now, the one that says, "I'm holding it together. Please don't look too closely." But he did. He looked. He listened to my heartbeat. He asked questions I didn't want to answer, and then he went silent. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. He didn't tell me I was dying. He didn't need to. The way he pressed his lips together, the way his eyes softened without blinking, that was enough. There's a way people look at you when they know your time is thinning out. It's not pity, it's a kind of reverence, like they're already holding space for your absence. He ordered tests. I nodded. I signed papers. I said thank you too many times, as if gratitude could change the outcome. I left that office with a pamphlet I didn't want and an appointment card I didn't want to use. But I also left with something else, clarity, not the dramatic movie kind, a quiet one, like fog lifting just enough to show the road ahead, steep, winding, and finite. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. No TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and my own breath, trying to stay steady. I opened that pamphlet, stared at the words congestive heart failure, and let them sink into the space between denial and truth. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I wept, not for the diagnosis, but for the time I wasted pretending nothing was wrong. That was the moment I understood. The body never lies, but it does wait. It waits for you to care. It waits for you to stop long enough to listen. I made it wait too long, and now I carry that silence with me. A silence I'm only now learning to speak through. It was a Tuesday morning when the thought first whispered itself into my mind. I might not see another Christmas. It wasn't a dramatic moment. I was folding a sweater, one George used to wear, navy blue with a missing button. The scent of cedar from the old chest it had been tucked into lingered in the room. My hands stopped mid-fold, the knit wool between my fingers suddenly heavy, like it remembered more than I did. And that's when the thought came. Not with fear, not with panic, just with a quiet, devastating certainty. I had gone back to the doctor the day before. More tests, more waiting. But deep inside, I didn't need a diagnosis anymore. My body was already telling the story. My breath was thinner, my chest tighter, my steps shorter. It wasn't just age. I knew that now. Something inside me was dimming, slowly, steadily. And the most haunting part of it all? How peaceful it felt to finally admit it. I put the sweater down and sat on the edge of the bed. The light coming through the window was soft, golden, dancing on the dust particles in the air. Everything felt still. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just listened to my breath, to my heart, to the echo of the thought that had settled into the back of my mind. I might not see another Christmas. Not because of some prophecy, not because a doctor told me so, but because when your time is near, the body begins to close the curtains long before the final act. And if you're quiet enough, if you've lived long enough, you begin to notice the shadows changing shape. In that moment, memories poured into me like water breaking through a dam. Christmas is past. My children unwrapping presents in their pajamas, George carving the turkey, laughter layered over music, over warmth, over life. And then I imagined this year's Christmas, maybe without me. My chair empty, my voice absent. The gifts unopened because I wasn't there to hand them out. I tried to imagine them without me. I tried to picture them smiling. And part of me wanted to believe they'd be okay, that my absence wouldn't collapse their joy. But another part, an older, softer part, just wanted more time. Not to fix anything, not to do something grand, just to be. To watch the tree lights flicker one more time, to hold my grandson's hand while he tells me about school, to taste cinnamon cookies and feel the ache in my knees from standing too long in the kitchen. But time, once you feel it slipping, becomes sacred in a way you never understood before. Every breath becomes a gift. Every heartbeat, a fragile mercy. That morning, I folded the sweater slowly and placed it back into the cedar chest. I pressed my hand against its worn fabric for just a moment longer. And in my heart, I whispered goodbye, not to Christmas, not yet, but to the illusion that I had all the time in the world. Because when you start counting moments instead of days, you begin to understand what truly matters and how precious it all really was. I started to notice how people spoke to me differently, even before I said anything about the doctor's words or the weight in my chest. It's strange how others can sense when something is shifting inside you, even when you've barely admitted it to yourself. My daughter lingered longer during her visits. My neighbor, Harold, began offering to bring in my mail, though he never used to. And my youngest grandson, Thomas, hugged me a little tighter, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something like intuition. But what struck me most wasn't how others treated me. It was how I started treating the world around me. I found myself pausing in places I used to rush through. I'd stand by the kitchen window and just watch. Watch the wind bend the trees, the birds squabble at the feeder, the slow dance of clouds across a pale sky. I wasn't doing it to pass time. I was doing it because time had suddenly become something I could feel. It had weight, texture, and I was learning to hold it gently. One afternoon, I sat outside on the porch with a blanket over my lap and a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The air smelled of rain, though the sky hadn't yet opened. And I remember thinking, this is enough. Not in a sad way, not in surrender, but in recognition that this breath, this breeze, this moment was enough. I didn't need a miracle or a cure. I just needed this one slice of stillness. It's hard to explain how the world softens when you begin to say goodbye to it. Sounds become more musical. Light feels warmer on the skin. Even pain becomes something you can sit beside, like an old friend who no longer needs to be feared. Of course, the pain was still there. The pressure in my chest hadn't left. It had simply become part of the rhythm, part of the truth I now carried with me. But instead of fighting it, I started to walk alongside it, like walking hand in hand with the inevitable. And in that space, I also began to forgive, not just others, but myself. I forgave myself for the things I didn't say when I should have, for the moments I rushed, for the times I let fear speak louder than love. I forgave myself for aging, for aching, for not being as strong as I once was. And I even forgave my heart, the same one that was slowly failing, for trying to keep me going all these years, even when I didn't treat it with the kindness it deserved. There is a quiet dignity in this kind of surrender. Not the surrender of giving up, but the surrender of acceptance. Of knowing that you have walked this road long enough and that now it's okay to rest. So I rested. I sat still. I watched the sky. And I let myself feel the miracle of simply being alive, even in the fading. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that I opened the old photo album, the thick one with the cracked leather spine and the pages that smelled faintly of dust and lavender. I hadn't touched it in years, maybe decades. It had become one of those things that sat untouched on the shelf, too heavy with memory to lift. But something inside me said, now. I settled into my chair, pulled the blanket tighter around my legs, and opened the first page. There we were, George and I, in black and white, frozen mid-laugh, his arm draped over my shoulder like I was something precious. I could hear his voice in that photo. Not the exact words, but the way he used to say my name like it was a melody. Photo after photo, I traveled back through my life. The babies in my arms, the birthdays, the snowstorms, the burnt Thanksgiving turkey, the laughter, the loss, the growing, the changing. All of it, page after page, stitched together like a quilt I didn't realize I'd been making all along. There's a strange ache in looking at your whole life in a single sitting. It humbles you. It reminds you how quickly it all moved. One moment I was 20 and full of fire, and then, in what feels like a blink, I'm 76, tracing my own story with wrinkled fingers. But there's something beautiful in that too. A kind of sacred slowing down. I wasn't racing anymore. I was remembering. And every face in those photos, every wrinkle, every grin, told me that I had lived, truly lived. Through heartbreaks and hospital stays, through weddings and widowhood, through the quiet Tuesdays and the thunderstorm Saturdays. I paused at a photo of my daughter when she was 7, holding a frog in her hands with a grin that nearly split her face in two. I whispered thank you to that moment. And again, later, when I came to the photo of Thomas as a baby, asleep on my chest. Another thank you. That album became more than memories that day. It became proof. Proof that love mattered more than fear. That the small things, the messes, the jokes, the midnight dances in the kitchen were the real story. Not the career I didn't pursue. Not the body that aged. Not even the illness that grew quietly in my chest. As I turned the last page, I realized something simple and profound. I was not afraid of dying anymore, because I had already been so alive. I had tasted it. I had held it. And now I was ready to let it go, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Sometimes you don't need more time. You just need to see your time for what it truly was, a gift fragile and unrepeatable. That afternoon, with the album on my lap and the sun sinking gently outside, I finally felt at peace with every chapter, especially this one. That evening, as twilight wrapped itself around the trees outside my window, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, pen on paper, slow, deliberate strokes. It was to my daughter, but really, it was to anyone who might one day wonder what I wished I'd said out loud. The first few lines were difficult. How do you put a lifetime of unspoken things into a single page? How do you find the words to express love without sounding final? But then the pen started to move more freely, almost like my hand had been waiting decades to speak. I didn't fill the letter with advice. That never felt right. I think the older I got, the more I realized how little people need answers and how much they need someone to simply say, I see you, I understand. So that's what I gave her. I told her about the night she was born, how terrified and full of awe I felt holding her for the first time. I told her how proud I was of the mother she became. And I told her, not in a dramatic way, but in the most honest way I could, that I didn't have much time left. It wasn't meant to scare her. It was meant to prepare her. Because the one thing this illness has taught me is that goodbyes whispered early hurt less than the ones never said. As I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, I felt a strange peace, like I had anchored myself to something lasting. Words can outlive the body, and maybe someday when she's older, when she needs to feel me close, she'll read that letter and hear my voice again. Not the sick version, not the old woman who can't catch her breath, but the mother who held her at every stage of life, through scraped knees and teenage silence, through heartbreaks and the birth of her own children. I've since written 3 more letters, one to each of my grandchildren. They're tucked away in a wooden box in my closet. I don't plan to tell them about the letters just yet. They'll find them when they need to. And when they do, I hope they feel not just my words, but my arms around them. Because sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's ink on old paper, folded into corners, waiting to be opened when the world gets too quiet. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in weeks. The pain in my chest hadn't vanished, but the weight in my spirit had. And that, I think, is the kind of healing we don't talk about enough. The kind that comes not from medicine, but from meaning. From knowing that before the lights go out, you left something behind that glows. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still that soft, sleepy shade of gray, and the birds hadn't begun their conversations yet. There was a kind of stillness in the air, not empty, but full of something sacred. I swung my legs slowly over the side of the bed, the familiar ache in my knees greeting me like an old friend. My chest was heavy, yes, but not with fear this time. It was heavy with memory, with meaning. I went to the kitchen and boiled water for tea. The kettle's whistle was softer now, worn from years of use. As I waited, I looked at the calendar on the wall. Another month halfway gone. Time was slipping, but I wasn't chasing it anymore. I was walking beside it, hand in hand, like two old companions who've stopped trying to outrun one another. That morning, I didn't reach for the television or the newspaper. I sat in silence with my tea and listened. Not to the world, but to myself. To the parts of me that still had things to say. And what I heard was this: don't waste the little time you have left trying to undo the past. Just be present for what remains. I thought about all the moments I had rushed through in life. Dinners eaten too quickly, conversations I didn't really listen to, hands I held without feeling their warmth. It's easy to get lost in the noise of survival. But when the end edges closer, survival steps aside and presence becomes the only thing that matters. So I made a promise to myself that day. I would live every moment I had left on purpose. I would taste my tea. I would feel the texture of the sun on my face. I would look into the eyes of people when they spoke, even if they were just talking about the weather. Because this quiet, ordinary now, is all I had, and that made it extraordinary. Later that day, I went outside and sat on the back step. My garden, once so full of life, had begun to fade with the season. Some of the flowers were wilting. The leaves had started to brown, and I thought to myself, we're not so different, my garden and I. But even in the fading, there was beauty. Even in decay, there was dignity. A single blue jay landed on the railing, tilting its head at me like it had a question. I smiled at it. I whispered, yes, I'm still here. And for that moment, I truly was. Not as a woman who was dying, but as a woman who was alive, fully, gently, meaningfully. We talk so much about life being short, but we forget to say it's also wide. It stretches with meaning if you let it. And in the quiet of that morning, I finally gave myself permission to stretch into it, not to fight the ending, but to honor every breath before the last. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. My daughter, Clara, showed up without calling first, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She walked in with her arms full of groceries, her face flushed from the cold, and said, I thought maybe we could make that soup you used to love. Just like that. No preamble. No heavy conversation, just soup. I watched her move around the kitchen, reaching for spices she remembered without needing to ask. She knew where everything was. The drawer with the wooden spoons, the chipped blue bowl I never replaced, the teacup with the tiny crack I always used anyway. It reminded me how much of ourselves we leave behind in the hands of those we raise. Not just recipes and routines, but the deeper things. How to care, how to show up, how to offer presence instead of panic. We didn't talk much at first. The sound of chopping carrots and simmering broth filled the silence, and it was a comfortable one. But then, somewhere between peeling potatoes and seasoning the stock, she turned to me and asked, Mom, are you scared? I could have lied. I could have smiled and said, Of course not, sweetheart. But I didn't, not this time. Yes, I said quietly, but not of dying. I'm scared you'll forget the little things, the way the sun looks through the curtains at 4 p.m., the feel of flour on your fingertips, the way your heart skips when someone says your name with love. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached out and held my hand across the counter. Firm, warm, familiar. In that moment, we weren't mother and daughter divided by years and loss. We were just two women trying to understand time. We ate together that evening, slowly. Every spoonful of soup was a kind of communion, a quiet ritual of remembering and letting go. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt necessary. Not because I was doing anything, but because I was still here, still passing something down. Even if it was just how to make a pot of soup taste like love. After she left, I sat in the quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was fuller now, echoing with the weight of that moment. And I realized something. We don't need big declarations to say goodbye. Sometimes we just need a day in the kitchen, a shared silence, a recipe passed from one heart to another. That's how memory works. It sneaks in with the steam from the stove. It lingers in the corners of rooms and the curves of worn-out bowls. And even after I'm gone, I know that when Clara makes that soup, some part of me will rise with the scent, warm, gentle, and still here. That night, as the wind began to rattle the windows and the quiet deepened, I sat by the fireplace with a small notebook on my lap. The one with the worn leather cover and the pages that had turned slightly yellow with age. I had started it decades ago, with grand intentions of writing poems or recipes or reflections. But as life got busier, I only wrote in it during moments of pain or moments of clarity. There were only a handful of entries. Some were raw, written with trembling hands during nights I thought I wouldn't make it to morning. Others were hopeful, penned when new life had just entered the family, or when I felt joy bubble up from somewhere unexpected. But tonight, I opened to a fresh page, and I began to write the one thing I had never dared to say out loud. I forgive myself. The words startled me as they formed. I sat with them for a while, letting them breathe on the page. All these years, I had forgiven others. I had offered grace to people who hurt me, even when they never asked for it. But myself? No. I had carried regrets like stones in my chest, some so deeply buried, I forgot they were there. I thought of the times I was too harsh, too afraid, too distant. The days I let my anger speak before my love. The moments I chose silence when someone needed to hear my voice. The times I ran from my own truth just to avoid conflict. All of it came rushing back, not to punish me, but to finally be released. I closed my eyes and whispered those words again. I forgive myself. And as I did, I felt something shift. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, but gently. Like a door that had been stuck for years had finally creaked open. I realized that aging isn't just about losing strength. It's about shedding what you were never meant to carry forever. Shame, fear, guilt. These things aren't badges of wisdom. They're weights. And tonight, I let them go, page by page. When I looked up, the fire was dying down, but the room didn't feel cold. It felt clean, like something sacred had happened, even if no one else would ever know it. That's the thing about peace. It rarely arrives with fanfare. It comes quietly, in the middle of a sentence, on the corner of a tear, in the flicker of a fire that doesn't ask to be seen. I left the notebook open beside the hearth, not to show anyone, but to remind myself in the morning that it was real. That even at 76, even with time running out, healing was still possible. That forgiveness, even the kind directed inward, was a form of love. And that maybe, just maybe, the final chapter of a life isn't about what you've done, but about how gently you can let go. The next morning, I found myself walking slower than usual, not just because of the usual aches in my legs or the tightness in my chest, but because I wanted to notice everything. The creak of the old floorboard in the hallway, the way the sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows that danced like memories across the wall. Every corner of my house seemed to whisper something, not of sadness, but of presence. I wasn't just existing in this space anymore. I was savoring it. I wandered into my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Inside, folded neatly, were little tokens from across the years. My late husband's favorite handkerchief, a drawing one of my grandchildren made me when he was 5, a postcard I never mailed from a trip I never took. They weren't valuable in the traditional sense, but they held entire stories. And I realized, with a quiet ache, that no one would know those stories if I didn't tell them. So I began again, not with pen and paper this time, but with my voice. I turned on the old recorder Clara had gifted me years ago, the one I never learned to use properly. I pressed the red button and simply began to talk. I talked about how I met James at the county fair, how we danced in the grass even after the music stopped, how he proposed with a piece of string because he was too nervous to buy a ring first. I talked about the miscarriage I never told anyone about, how it broke me quietly, and how I healed slowly, with the sound of Clara's tiny breath on my chest when she was born. I talked about my fear of aging and how it was replaced, over time, with something that looked a lot like grace. I didn't plan what to say. I just let the memories pour out, like warm tea into a chipped cup. There was no audience, no performance, just my truth, raw and real. And in speaking it, I felt seen, even if only by myself. That afternoon, I left the recorder on my bedside table. Maybe one day someone will find it. Maybe they'll press play and hear not just my voice, but my heart. In every stutter, every pause, every tear I didn't hide. Maybe they'll realize that life isn't about milestones or grand gestures, but about the quiet moments we choose to honor. I think that's the greatest gift we can leave behind. Not perfection, but presence. Not answers, but honesty. A voice that says, I was here, I felt deeply, I tried my best. And in that, we don't really vanish. We echo. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of amber and lavender, I sat outside wrapped in my old shawl, the one James gave me on our 25th anniversary. The breeze was cool, gentle, and I could hear the distant hum of life continuing. Children playing down the street, someone mowing a lawn, a radio drifting in and out from an open window. The world was moving, as it always had, but I was still. And for once, that stillness didn't feel like waiting. It felt like arrival. I thought about how much of my life I had spent chasing time, rushing to meet expectations, trying to be strong, to be useful, to be the one who held everything together. And now, here I was, in the final stretch, not holding anything, not rushing anywhere, and realizing that maybe this was always the point. To simply be, to witness your own life like a quiet observer, with tenderness instead of judgment. The pain in my chest was there again, not sharp, not terrifying, just present, steady, like a knock at the door that no longer needed to be feared. I placed my hand over my heart and whispered, I'm listening. Because now I understand that even the body speaks gently when the soul is ready to hear. I don't know how many more sunsets I'll see, but I do know this one mattered. Not because of anything spectacular, but because I was awake for it. I saw it. I thanked it. And that's more than I can say for too many days of my youth. If anyone ever hears these words, I want you to know, you don't have to wait until the end to start seeing your life. Don't wait until the pain speaks louder than joy. Don't wait until time runs thin to realize you were always worthy of slowing down, of breathing deeply, of loving without hesitation. Love fully, forgive gently, rest often, and above all, don't carry your life like a burden. Carry it like a story, one only you can tell. As the light faded, I closed my eyes and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, or easy, or finished, but because I had finally made peace with the silence. And in that silence, I heard something beautiful. I was never alone. I was always becoming. And maybe that was enough. If this story found a quiet place in your heart, let it stay a little longer. Like this video, if it made you reflect, and subscribe to the channel so these voices, tender, real, and often forgotten, can continue to echo. Not every goodbye is loud. Sometimes it's a whisper we need to hear before it fades. Let her truth live on through your presence here.